What if the person who once made your darkest mornings bearable was still out there, quietly doing the same for others, decades later? When Keanu Reeves stepped onto a bus in his old neighborhood, he never expected to find that familiar face behind the wheel. And what happened next? No one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Your support is the motivation that drives us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. The late autumn breeze in Toronto carried a chill that wasn't just in the air. It seemed to reach deep into Keanu Reeves' chest as he stepped off the sidewalk and looked up at the old bus stop sign. The paint was chipped, the curb was cracked, but the moment felt strangely whole. He hadn't stood on this corner in over 30 years. A part of him had expected everything to feel smaller. But the bench was still there. The same old maple tree still dropped leaves like it had when he was 15 and too quiet for the world. Back then, mornings were cold, and the city felt indifferent. But there had been one constant, a smile from a man behind a steering wheel. The bus creaked to a stop in front of him. It was the same route, Route 34, though the paint job had changed. He stepped on instinctively, scanning the familiar layout, then he froze. Behind the wheel sat a man whose shoulders had curved slightly with age, whose eyes looked a little dimmer but still kind, whose posture was slower but somehow steady. Keanu stared. "Sir?" the man said without much expression. "Just a polite nod. Fare's the same." Keanu smiled, hesitated, then stepped forward. "Walter?" he asked, his voice nearly caught in his throat. The driver looked up, blinked. "Do I know you?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He studied the lines in the man's face, looking for the one smile that used to anchor his mornings. But there was only a flicker of polite confusion. He found an empty seat near the back. The bus pulled away from the curb, and the silence pressed down harder than he expected. He watched Walter in the mirror, saw the way he checked each stop sign, nodded to every passenger, no matter how distracted they were. Walter hadn't changed, not in the way that mattered. And yet, something had shifted. By the time the ride ended, Keanu remained seated, unsure if he should say anything more. Walter parked at the final stop, stood slowly, and turned to him. "Last one. You all right there, sir?" Keanu nodded, stood, and gave a quiet smile. Yeah, I'm good. Just a little lost in time." Walter offered a small, professional nod. "Happens to the best of us." As Keanu stepped off the bus, the door hissing shut behind him. A weight settled in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was disappointment, or the realization that maybe some memories belong more to us than to the people in them. Noi Dung Chuang. That night, Keanu didn't sleep well. He kept seeing Walter's face, older, yes, but still familiar in a way that tugged at something deep inside him. There had been a flicker, just for a second, when their eyes met, but it passed, and now it was gnawing at him. Was it recognition, or just a stranger being polite? The next morning, with a knit cap pulled low and sunglasses on, he walked to the end of the bus route. The garage was still there, tucked between a tire shop and an old diner that hadn't changed its neon sign in 40 years. He waited outside until a woman in a navy jacket stepped out with a clipboard and a thermos. "Excuse me," he called softly. "I was on Route 34 yesterday." The driver's name, Walter, I think. "Is he always on that shift?" She eyed him carefully, lips pressed together. "He's been driving that route for over a decade," she said. "Why?" Keanu hesitated, then offered a half smile. "He used to drive that same bus when I was a kid. He was kind to me. Back when not many people were." The woman's face softened. "Yeah, that sounds like Walter. Does he have family?" She shook her head. "Not that we know of. Lives alone. Doesn't say much. Always shows up early. Never complains. Company tried to retire him twice. He asked to stay." Keanu stood still for a moment. The world had spun so fast around him. Movies, fame, cameras. But here was someone still living at the same speed as 3 decades ago. It didn't sit right. He left his name with her, asked her to pass along a message that an old passenger remembered him. That was all, for now. Later that evening, he took a walk around his childhood block. The apartment building was still there, paint faded, but intact. He found the alley behind it where he used to wait for the bus, clutching his backpack like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. He remembered Walter's voice back then. Always the same, calm, steady, a soft, "Mornin', son," even when Keanu didn't reply. Some days that was the only voice he heard before dark. Back at the hotel, he sat at the desk, fingers hovering over his phone. A long pause. Then he typed, "Toronto Social Services," into the search bar. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that something in his chest felt unresolved. The next morning, he rode the same bus again. Walter didn't seem surprised to see him. "You again," he said, smiling faintly. "You getting nostalgic or lost?" "A little of both," Keanu replied, taking the seat behind him. They rode in silence for a while. When the last passenger stepped off, Keanu leaned forward. "You were the first adult who ever looked at me like I mattered," he said quietly. "I don't think I ever told you that." Walter didn't turn. His hands remained on the wheel. "I just drove the bus, son. That's all." Keanu exhaled. Maybe, but for a kid who felt invisible, that was everything. Walter finally glanced at him, eyes steady but unreadable. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," Keanu said, voice low, "but maybe I owe it to that kid I used to be." Walter shook his head, chuckled softly. "You actors always think in big circles." There was no bitterness in his tone, just weariness, and something else, dignity. Keanu stepped off at the same corner where they first met. As the bus pulled away, he stood on the sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, unsure whether he'd done something meaningful or just made it harder for both of them. He didn't have answers yet, just a quiet, heavy question he couldn't shake. Keanu returned to the bus the next afternoon, this time without any plan to fix things or make a gesture. He just wanted to listen. He bought a day pass, stepped on quietly, and nodded when Walter looked up. "Back again," Walter said, more amused than surprised. Keanu smiled, easing into a seat 2 rows behind. Couldn't stay away. The engine rumbled to life, and the bus rolled through narrow city streets that looked both familiar and new. A mother boarded with a stroller. A man in a construction vest nodded hello. Walter returned every greeting with that same even tone, the kind that didn't try too hard, just enough to say, "I see you." The ride was quiet, almost comfortable, until Keanu stood near the front to get off. As he reached for the rail, his eyes caught something just above the steering wheel, tucked between a small crack in the dash and the window frame. It was faded from sun and time, curled at the edges, but unmistakable. A school bus ticket. Old style, the kind issued in the 1980s. Blue ink, torn top. His heart thudded once, then again. "Is that real?" Keanu asked softly, pointing. Walter glanced down. "That? Yeah. Found it on a seat one day. Long time ago. Some kid must have left it." Keanu stared, lips parted. He didn't speak right away. Something about the way Walter said it, detached, almost absent-minded, felt like a defense. Like he knew exactly what that ticket was, and what it meant. He stepped off at the next stop, not because it was where he needed to go, but because he didn't trust himself to speak without his voice cracking. Later that day, he asked to meet someone at the depot. A woman in her 60s with a soft gray bob greeted him with a puzzled look. "Marlene," she introduced herself. "Been here longer than the walls." "What's this about Walter?" Keanu explained, carefully, respectfully, that he wasn't looking to disturb anyone's peace, just wanted to understand. Marlene folded her arms. "He won't take charity, if that's what you're planning." "I figured." She hesitated, then leaned on the counter. "Years ago, he stepped in for a mechanic who got fired over a scheduling mix-up. It wasn't his fight, but Walter told the boss. We're either honest with all of them or none. It cost him a seniority bump. No one ever said a word. He never brought it up again." Keanu was quiet for a long moment. "And he's still driving full-time?" "Wants to," she replied. "Truth is, he could have retired 5 years back. Pension's not much, no family, doesn't want a ceremony, just wants to drive." Outside, the sky had turned a softer gray. Keanu walked 3 blocks to the address Marlene scribbled for him on a napkin. The apartment was modest, windows small, bricks darkened from years of winter wear. He didn't go in. He just stood across the street, staring up at a light on the second floor. It flickered once, then steadied. He imagined Walter sitting by the window, the same way he once sat behind the wheel, quiet, unseen, doing what needed to be done without ever asking for more. And Keanu couldn't help but feel that for every award, every headline, every hand he'd ever shaken, this man had done more for the world in a single bus ride than he had in an entire press tour. The next few days were a mix of restless pacing and long pauses at the hotel window. Watching the city move as if it didn't notice him, Keanu had faced critics, press junkets, even stunt falls at 60 miles an hour, but nothing felt as difficult as trying to reach a man who'd spent his life avoiding the spotlight. He decided to stop thinking like an actor and start thinking like a person. That meant no cameras, no announcements, just a simple gesture. He arranged for a small gathering, an appreciation event for longtime transit workers in Toronto. The plan was modest: no stage lights, no interviews, just food, laughter, and quiet thanks. He paid for the venue out of pocket, made sure it was open to anyone who had driven, cleaned, or kept the system running. Marlene helped spread the word at the depot. When Keanu gently asked her to extend an invitation to Walter, she hesitated. "He won't come," she said, "especially if he thinks it's about him." "Don't mention me," Keanu replied. "Just say it's for the folks who've kept Toronto moving." She nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. A few days later, Keanu showed up early at the event. He stood by the back wall, coffee in hand, watching as drivers and mechanics trickled in, some in uniforms, some in old jackets with company patches fading at the seams. They looked surprised by the food, touched by the framed certificates with their names. Walter didn't come. Later that evening, Keanu approached Marlene again. He really didn't want to be seen. Did he? He told me, "I'm not some story. Let the others have their day." There was no bitterness in her tone, only a strange blend of admiration and quiet sorrow. She paused, reached into her bag, and pulled out a small cardboard box. "I probably shouldn't show you this, but maybe it's time." Keanu opened the lid. Inside was a folded square of yellowed paper, worn at the corners. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, young, but unmistakable. "To Mr. Walter, the first person who made me believe I mattered." Keanu stared at it, heart swelling with something between grief and awe. "I found it in the depot years ago," Marlene said, tucked behind a file cabinet. "He never mentioned it, never threw it away either." Keanu didn't speak. His thumb brushed lightly over the faded ink. In that moment, he understood something he hadn't before, not fully. Walter didn't avoid recognition out of pride. He did it out of belief. A belief that good things should be done quietly. That some gestures are enough as they are. Later that night, Keanu sat in his hotel room. That small note beside him on the table. He opened his laptop and began typing. Not a press release, not a speech, just a letter, to Walter. He didn't know if he would ever send it. He only knew he needed to write it. Keanu sat in his hotel room with the old folded paper resting gently in his hands. He had turned it over a dozen times, reading the faded words like a prayer. To Mr. Walter, the first person who made me believe I mattered. The boy who wrote those words had barely spoken to anyone back then. Quiet, uncertain, often invisible. Now, decades later, that same boy had the means to speak to the world. But what could he say that wouldn't cheapen what Walter had done with such quiet dignity? With Marlene's help, he came up with something small, subtle, and sincere. A community tribute, billed as an evening honoring the city's unsung public workers, janitors, crossing guards, train operators, mechanics, and bus drivers. No red carpet, no media circus, just a warm space, soft lighting, and the sound of people finally being seen. Keanu made sure the guest list was wide and casual. No suits required. He wrote the invitations by hand, including one addressed to Mr. Walter. No names were listed on the program. He didn't want Walter to feel singled out or manipulated. The envelope simply read, "A night of gratitude, for those who kept us going when no one noticed." Walter received the invitation on a rainy Thursday. He opened it slowly, standing just inside the door of his apartment. His eyes moved across the words once, then again. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply placed the envelope on the table. beside an old pair of reading glasses and a cup of tea gone cold. 2 nights later, he walked in quietly, 20 minutes after the doors had opened. He chose a seat in the back corner of the hall, folding his coat over his lap and adjusting his posture like a man still on duty. No one recognized him, no one asked why he was there, and that, he figured, was a blessing. Keanu stood near the stage, speaking with volunteers and nodding to guests as they arrived, when he spotted the shape of Walter seated in the back row. Something in his chest tightened, not fear, not nerves, just a deep pull of recognition, like seeing a lighthouse from the deck of a ship. The evening unfolded with gentle rhythm, one speaker after another sharing stories of unseen kindness. A street sweeper who had paid a child's bus fare, a mailman who walked through snowstorms without fail. The crowd laughed, clapped, wiped their eyes now and then. Then Keanu stepped up to the microphone. He didn't wear a suit, no fanfare, just a soft expression and a paper in his hand that he didn't bother unfolding. "I want to tell you a story," he began, his voice warm and steady. "It's about a boy, quiet, withdrawn, not very sure of himself. He took the bus to school every morning. No one talked to him. No one really noticed him. Except for one man. The room fell still. This man greeted him with a smile. Every day, rain or shine, never asked for anything in return. Just a small moment of kindness. And that boy held onto it like a lifeline." A few in the audience tilted their heads, listening more closely now. "That simple act," Keanu said, his voice catching slightly, reminded that boy he was worth seeing. Worth something. He looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd, but not landing anywhere specific. "I don't know where that man is now, but if he's here tonight, I want him to know, he changed a life. He changed mine." A hush fell over the room, as if the air had thickened with unspoken emotion. Keanu stepped back from the mic, nodded to the lighting technician, and gestured gently toward the crowd. "One person in this room," he said, "taught me more about humanity than any red carpet ever could. I'd like to ask him to join me up here, if he feels comfortable." He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. A single spotlight began to drift, landing slowly on the far corner of the hall. Walter blinked against the light. Confused at first, he looked around, then back at Keanu. For a moment, he seemed ready to stand, but stopped, unsure. The crowd began to shift, some turning, some whispering. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. Keanu held his gaze steady, offering nothing but a quiet invitation. Walter's hands rested on the arms of his chair. He didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed, deeply, once, before reaching down to pick up his coat. Walter's footsteps were slow, not from weakness but from the quiet reluctance of a man unaccustomed to attention. The spotlight followed him gently, not sharp or demanding, just enough to guide him through the soft hush that fell over the room. People parted as he moved forward, unsure whether to applaud or simply watch in reverence. He reached the edge of the stage, where Keanu stood waiting with both hands extended. For a moment, Walter hesitated, then, without a word, he climbed the steps and met Keanu's embrace, a firm, heartfelt connection that needed no explanation. The applause came then, warm and genuine, filling the space not with noise but with gratitude. Keanu stepped back slightly, placing a hand on Walter's shoulder. "I don't know if I'd have made it through high school without you," he said, voice soft but steady. "There were mornings I barely wanted to get out of bed. But then you'd be there, looking me in the eye, like I mattered, like I deserved to be here. You probably don't remember, but I've never forgotten." Walter didn't speak, he just nodded, eyes glistening with something deeper than pride. Keanu turned to the audience and held up a framed certificate, modest in size but rich in meaning. "This isn't from a city office or some formal board. It's from me, and from all of us who've ridden in silence while someone like Mr. Walter kept showing up." He handed the frame to Walter, who took it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. Then Keanu continued, "Tonight, I'm also announcing the start of something called the Silent Wheels Fund." He said, "It's meant to honor people like Walter. Not with awards, not with speeches, but with real help. Retirement support, healthcare, even just a day off when it's needed most." There was a murmur in the crowd, approval, emotion. Something stirred. No one clapped this time. They were too busy listening. Walter was handed the microphone. He stared at it like it was a foreign object, then brought it close, adjusting his grip with the ease of someone used to holding onto things that mattered. He didn't give a speech. He didn't clear his throat or look around for permission. He just said one sentence. I never thought a good morning could go that far. And then he smiled, small and real. The room was silent, a respectful, aching kind of silence. It wasn't just about Keanu anymore. It wasn't even just about Walter. It was about every person who'd ever held the door for a stranger, offered a kind word, waved from behind the wheel without expecting anything back. Down in the third row, someone leaned over to a neighbor and whispered, "He used to do the same thing for me. Every day. I thought I was the only one." The neighbor nodded, voice low but certain. Maybe we all thought that. Walter stepped back, still holding the frame. He didn't bow. He didn't wave. He simply stood beside Keanu. Two very different lives bound by one quiet truth. That sometimes, the smallest things go the farthest. The video clip was barely 3 minutes long. No grand music, no professional editing, just a simple recording from someone in the crowd, capturing the moment when Walter stepped on stage, visibly overwhelmed, and Keanu welcomed him like an old friend returning home. The warmth in the room translated through screens like sunlight through a kitchen window. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. By morning, millions, people from all over the country, some who'd once lived in Toronto, some who had never set foot in Canada, began commenting. They didn't know Walter, but they knew someone like him. A school janitor who always had gum in his pocket for nervous kids. A crossing guard who remembered everyone's names. A city bus driver who waited an extra beat when he saw you running down the block. Local news stations picked it up first, then national ones, not for the sake of the celebrity, but because the story wasn't about fame. It was about impact, quiet, consistent, and real, the kind that doesn't need spotlights to matter. Reporters dug into transit archives, reaching out to riders who'd spent years on Walter's route. Some remembered him clearly, how he'd wear a different tie on holidays, how he greeted every kid by name when he could. Others hadn't known his name but recalled, that driver who always said, "Glad you're here today." As the story spread, so did something else. A growing public conversation about the people society depends on, but rarely thanks. Posts flooded in. Photos of mail carriers in the rain, sanitation workers on snowy mornings, school bus drivers waving from their rearview mirrors, each tagged with #SilentWheels. In city halls across North America, conversations began, not just about Walter, but about dignity in work, about retirement plans that weren't enough, jobs that lasted longer than bodies were meant to carry, about saying thank you not just in sentiment, but in policy. Keanu didn't speak to the media. He turned down interviews, politely declining the stage that had come looking for him. What he had to say, he'd already said, with a hug, with a gesture, with the truth of his own experience. Instead, he spent his time helping set up the foundation's first programs, transport subsidies, therapy support, and small grants to help longtime workers ease into retirement with peace. Walter, meanwhile, continued his quiet routine. He still rose early, still walked the same block to the diner on Tuesdays, still kept the radio volume low. He hadn't changed, and he didn't plan to. He wasn't chasing headlines, he was just glad people were finally looking in the right direction. But something small did shift. A few weeks after the event, Walter was invited to speak at a local high school, not because of fame, but because the guidance counselor had seen the video and thought, "That's the kind of man our students should hear from." He arrived wearing his best sweater, the one with elbow patches and a stitched repair near the wrist. His shoes were polished. He stood behind the podium with both hands resting gently on the wood, as if steadying not just himself, but the weight of the moment. "I don't know much about giving speeches," he said, eyes scanning the rows of quiet students. "But I know about showing up. Sometimes, that's all you can do. And sometimes, it's everything." The auditorium was still. No bells, no buzzing phones, no whispered giggles, just the quiet of a room full of young people listening to something they didn't know they needed. As he stepped down, a woman approached him slowly, maybe in her late 70s. She looked hesitant, holding something in both hands, A pale blue envelope. The kind that used to carry birthday cards. She said, almost in a whisper, "You don't know me, Mr. Walter, but my son, he used to ride your bus. He was quiet, never spoke much, went through a hard time in high school." She paused, holding back tears. "You used to say, 'Glad you're here, buddy,' every single day. He never told you, but that saved him." Walter's hands trembled slightly as he took the envelope. Inside was a letter, neatly folded, written years ago. The words simple, the handwriting careful. "Thank you for being the only person who looked me in the eye and made me feel like I belonged." Walter didn't speak, he just nodded. The envelope pressed gently to his chest. His heart full of memories finally returned. The sun was low when Keanu knocked on the modest apartment door. Not far from the heart of the city. The building was quiet, older but clean, and filled with the kind of silence that only late afternoons seemed to carry. He hadn't brought anything with him, no reporters, no gifts, not even his assistant, just himself. Walter opened the door slowly, wearing a cardigan that hung a little loosely on his frame. But his smile came quick and steady. There was no awkwardness now, no polite distance, just two men who had finally found a shared truth between them. They settled near the window, where the light spilled across the table and onto the worn carpet. Keanu poured the tea he'd brought. Walter laid out a plate of oatmeal cookies he insisted were the best store-bought kind you'll ever taste. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't a thank you dinner. It was just Tuesday. "I used to sit on the left side of the bus," Keanu said, "near the middle door. I never said much, just stared out the window." Walter nodded, chuckling gently. "I remember. You'd have your hoodie up even on the warm days. Wouldn't make eye contact with anyone." "I was scared," Keanu admitted, "of everything. And yet you still showed up every morning." They sipped their tea in silence for a while, letting the memory fill the spaces between words. Keanu looked out at the street below, where people walked without looking up, moving through life as if nothing extraordinary was ever happening. But sometimes, the extraordinary looked just like this. "I used to think I owed you a debt," Keanu said quietly, "like I'd never be able to repay the kindness you gave so freely." Walter looked at him, his expression kind but firm. "You didn't owe me anything. That's not how kindness works." Keanu smiled faintly, feeling the tightness in his chest loosen. "Then maybe it wasn't about paying you back. Maybe it was about making sure you knew that you mattered, that you made a difference." Walter's eyes misted. He blinked slowly. "I think that's what everyone wants. In the end, just to know we didn't go unseen." He paused and gestured around the apartment, a small but bright space Keanu had quietly secured after Walter left his aging walk-up. "I'm grateful for this," Walter said, "not because of the rent or the view, but because you did it with dignity. You didn't turn me into a story. You let me be a person." Keanu didn't respond right away. He simply reached for another cookie, broke it in half, and offered it across the table. Later that night, back at his own home, Keanu opened the growing stack of letters arriving at the Silent Wheels Foundation. Most were notes of appreciation. A few included donations. Some came from people sharing their own stories of quiet heroes, crossing guards, cafeteria ladies, janitors, and night nurses. But one letter stood out. No return address, just a plain envelope and a single page inside. The handwriting was shaky but careful. "She taught in a town no one talks about. She stayed after class, every day, so I wouldn't fall behind. Once, she gave me her coat when mine tore and I was too embarrassed to say anything. Her name was Mrs. Delaney. She never knew how much she saved me." There was no name at the bottom. Just 3 words. "Please find her." Keanu stared at the letter for a long moment. Then he folded it gently and placed it in a folder marked, "Next." He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the city lights outside his window. They blinked and shimmered like echoes, faint but steady, like footsteps on pavement that refused to fade. The journey, he realized, didn't end when the applause stopped or the spotlight dimmed. The real journey was in what came after, in the way people remembered each other, in how they chose to show up for someone who once simply smiled and said, "Glad you're here today." Keanu reached for a pen and began drafting a plan. A school outreach, maybe, a traveling exhibit, another city, somewhere out there, another, Walter, was still waking up before dawn, still quietly giving more than he'd ever ask for in return. And Keanu would find them. Sometimes, the quietest gestures leave the loudest echoes. One kind word, one small act, like a bus driver's morning smile, can ripple through a lifetime. Keanu's story reminds us, we never truly know the impact we have on others, or how far a simple act of kindness might travel. Have you ever wanted to thank someone from your past who made a difference? No matter how small, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And if you found this story moving, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Secrets. More unforgettable, real-life moments are on the way, each one a quiet reminder that sometimes the world changes one heart at a time.